Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be making a response video to the Islamic scholar Dr. Yasir Qadhi in his attempt to reconcile the ideological contentions between the Islamic doctrines of divine creation and evolution. So before I let the video play, I'd just like to say that Dr. Qadhi deserves some praise here for attempting to rationally handle this paradigm clash without outright denying evolution and at the same time maintaining the Islamic human creation myth. However, he does make several errors, after which I expose them to discredit his entire argument here. So the original video was kind of long also, so I sped it up for time's sake.
We as Muslims, we need to understand that the theory of evolution pretty much has been accepted as much of a fact as any scientific theory. We need to stop deluding ourselves and saying that, oh, it is only a theory. That's not a very academic way to phrase this. Rather, the theory of evolution is like the theory of gravity. Gravity is a theory, by the way, how it forms and whatnot. It is as much of a fact amongst the scientific community as most other theories. So we need to educate ourselves in this point. We need to understand that the theory of evolution as it stands is a theory that takes into account certain facts that are undeniable and proposes a structure, a causality, a understanding of those facts in a very scientific manner. It's not unscientific. There are certain facts that are undeniable. For example, human bones. For example, bones of humanoid species. For example, microevolution, i.e. an evolution of a species slightly modifying itself. These are observable facts. If you take certain species of flies, put them in a jar, and monitor them for weeks with different circumstances, you will find that the flies actually adapt to those circumstances. And over the course of generations, they might develop immunities, they might, develop different wings or whatnot, and this is something that is undeniable. These things. So what the theory of evolution does, it takes these facts, these are undeniable facts, and then proposes a system that takes into account all of these facts. The reason I say this is many Muslims have never really studied the theory scientifically. They've never read a book, they've never really understood it, and they dismiss it in a manner that is simply unscientific. To say that the theory of evolution is only a theory ignores the whole point. To say that, oh, there are many holes or flaws in it, the fact of the matter is, and I say this as a believing Muslim, and I'm going to surprise you by saying this, but inshallah, stay with me, don't just walk out now, let me finish the whole talk. I say this as a committed Muslim, that the theory of evolution, from a scientific standpoint, in my humble opinion, with a background in science, with a degree in engineering, with a minor in chemistry and in math, and I have a degree in chemical engineering, the theory of evolution from a purely scientific standpoint, in my humble opinion, makes a lot of sense. Don't misquote me. I said from a scientific standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Now, the issue comes that we are Muslims, alhamdulillah. We believe in a book, alhamdulillah. That book tells us a very different version of events, right? So we now need to formulate a response. How do we reconcile? What do we do when the book says X and modern science says Y? This is really what we need to do. And we need to be mature when we do this. We need to be frank, we need to be honest. And we need to begin by understanding that there is a very big difference between the Western paradigm and the Islamic or Eastern paradigm. There's a very big difference in how the West views science and religion and scripture, and how the East, or the Muslims in particular, view science and religion and scripture. To be very short here, to move on to the next point, the West, from the very beginning, has had a tension between religion and scripture. From the very beginning. The Catholic Church, that was the only dominant church in Christianity 1,000 years ago, the Catholic Church prevented education. They wanted people to remain illiterate.
Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut the video right here. Basically, Dr. Qadhi goes on a tangent about how in the Dark Ages Christianity was at its pinnacle of dominance, and during that time it discouraged and stunted scientific progress, and then he takes that and compares it to the Islamic Golden Age, in which both Islam and science flourished. And so that's not really something that's relevant to the video again, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip over it. However, if you do want to watch that part of the video, then the link to the full video is in the description.
Now, a number of points. We need to understand that non-Muslims will never take any book of Revelation and consider it to be science. We don't expect them to. I mean, that's their paradigm. Do you really believe that a researcher who does not believe in the Quran will care what the Quran has to say? We, on the other hand, well, we care about what Allah says. And we must take into account what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So the question arises, is there any type of theory that we can propose that can take into account everything that science says is an indisputable fact? It is a fact that dinosaurs existed. We can't deny this. It is a fact that mankind has been on this earth for more than 6,000 years. We have cave paintings in hundreds of places. In France, yesterday in Mexico, they discovered some paintings. We have paintings that go back to the Aborigines of Africa 30,000 years. Now you tell me, anybody who knows carbon-14, and I'm a chemical engineer once upon a time, way upon a long time ago, I know carbon-14 dating. And this is as solid as any science you can have. Through carbon-14 dating, we know for a fact that 30,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, human beings, we, Homo sapiens, drew things on walls.
So just keep in mind Dr. Qadhi's acknowledgement of the solidity of carbon dating. Really, just keep that in mind.
Do you understand, brothers and sisters, when you deny evolution, you might deny one element, which is that Adam's father was a monkey, basically. I'm being very simplistic here, but I'm just being a bit crude here, because actually the theory of evolution does not say Adam's father was a monkey. I'm just being, purposely a little bit humorous here. But that's the one thing you're denying. However, no Muslim denies, as far as I know, no Muslim alim denies dinosaurs existed. I believe, as a Muslim alim and a scientist in my own way, I believe there were dinosaurs. I believe that there were creatures on this earth that were humanoid. I believe this firmly. We have their bones. We have their not civilizations, excuse me. Those creatures never had civilizations, by the way. They never had art. They never had writing. They never had two building structures. They didn't have those types of things, but they did have fire. They did have stone tools. They did have the basic rudimentary things that perhaps some type of primitive man might have had, but they weren't men. They weren't Homo sapiens.
Yeah, well, we, Homo sapiens, did not have civilization for the vast majority of our time on this planet. So sapiens first evolved in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago, and we survived and thrived as hunter-gatherers until the advent of the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution was when some populations of Homo sapiens began farming. The earliest populations to practice agriculture dates back only to 12,000 years ago in Turkey. And that's just where it first started. In China, it began some 9,000 years ago. In Mesoamerica, it began 6,500 years ago. And in South America, 3,500 years ago. Our first complex civilizations were first established only about 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians. As far as writing goes, we had first invented partial script writing about 5,500 years ago, and full script writing didn't come for another 1,000 years. This was Sumerian cuneiform. So I'm not exactly sure what Dr. Qadhi meant by other human species not having art, but the Neanderthals definitely did have cave paintings. And they also lived in Europe, which was heavily affected by the Ice Age at the time, and it was impossible for them to grow crops over there. And so, perhaps, and this is just speculation on my part, but if the Neanderthals lasted long enough to see the end of the Ice Age, they too might have started practicing agriculture in the fertile lands of Turkey. And since our complex civilizations were a consequence of the agricultural revolution, perhaps the Neanderthals could have built their own civilizations. I don't know, again, this is just speculation, but my point is that sapiens lived very similarly to other human species and other animals for the vast majority of our existence.
I also believe that microevolution is not a problem at all. What is microevolution? The evolution of a species within itself. Flies will change, other species will change. Now, problem comes macroevolution, which is a change from, let's say, a dog into a horse, let's say. Macroevolution is nothing other than hundreds of microevolutions. That's the problem, right? Macroevolution is simply, you keep on changing a little bit, and when you keep on changing, what happens? You kind of sort of diverge out into different animals.
A dog into a horse is an example of macroevolution? This seems to imply that modern species can and have evolved into other modern species. Dr. Qadhi probably just misspoke here, or just said the first thing that came into his head, but I just want to make clear that modern species cannot and have not evolved into other modern species. A dog and a horse share a common ancestor that, since dogs and horses are two very different kinds of mammals, probably lived sometime over 100 million years back. Overall, though, this segment was pretty good. Dr. Qadhi demonstrated that microevolution and macroevolution are fundamentally the same, and that it doesn't really make sense to accept one and not the other, just like a young earth creationist Christian would.
Looking at modern science and what it is proposing, and looking at the Quran, there are a number of ways to reconcile between this. What I lean towards is only one opinion, and there are others, and some of you in the audience while I was there brought forth other interpretations. What I lean towards is that it is possible for us to affirm the theory of evolution in the broad principles. That life as we know it came from one common ancestor, that all animals are linked together in some great grand tree, but we as Muslims have to say there was one exception to the rule. That's where we draw the line. We say there was one exception. And this exception, of course, is Adam alayhi salam and Banu Adam. And the max that can be said, now I am not saying this because I'm not a scientist, but I'm saying the max that we can say is to imagine, if you like, a series of dominoes tumbling. And they're all going, as we've all seen on YouTube clips and whatnot, all going in different directions, having been caused by one beginning domino, right? And eventually, if these dominoes continue, one line of these dominoes will lead to that domino, which is a final domino known as man. Because we know for a fact that nothing has been evolved from us. We are the final domino, right? What I am saying, the maximum that any believing Muslim can say is as follows. That all of these dominoes did indeed come from that one domino, that Allah Azza wa Jal. Now here's of course another difference. We don't believe in randomness. We believe Allah caused this. This is only the way that Allah did it, right? But we don't believe in randomness. We believe Allah did it. All of these dominoes came about, all of these species came about, and right when it was our turn, right when the next domino should have been our domino, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inserted that domino directly. And that's Banu Adam. And of course that domino, which is us, fits in perfectly with all the other dominoes because why would it not fit in perfectly? Allah is perfecting His creation. And all of the other species and all of the other things that were evolving are evolving the way they're supposed to. And then when it was our turn, at the right time, at the right place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us where we were supposed to be. Such that a neutral observer who doesn't believe in Allah, quote unquote, a kafir observer, would automatically say, obviously this domino comes from the one before it. And he has every right to make that claim. But because we have something we consider a fact, which is the Quran, which is just as much of a fact, in fact, more of a fact than any scientific fact, we have to say our scientific model has to take into account one more fact. And that is Allah Azza wa Jal shaped Adam, created Adam, blew the ruh into Adam, sent Adam down, the whole Quranic story.
Alright, so a lot was said here. Here we go. Firstly, for the dominoes example. Dr. Qadhi said that God placed the human domino directly, and that upon doing so, He perfected His creation. Perfecting His creation? Really? God seems to be a massive underachiever here. There are so many examples of blatant defects in humans as a whole. The misrouted laryngeal nerve wrapping around the aorta, the hips of a woman being too narrow for pain-free childbirth, injury-prone spines, wisdom teeth, the blind spot in the eye, and there are just so many others. I mean, what is this? What is this? It definitely isn't perfection. Also, when Dr. Qadhi said,
one line of these dominoes will lead to that domino, which is a final domino known as man. Because we know for a fact that nothing has been evolved from us. We are the final domino.
It is true that no species has evolved from us, but that doesn't mean we won't evolve into new species in the future. This is like saying that we know for a fact that nothing has evolved from a zebra, and therefore, zebras do not have the capacity to evolve into new species in the future. Dr. Qadhi has admitted that microevolution is a fact, and then he followed that up by accepting that macroevolution is also a fact, because it is nothing more than hundreds of microevolutions. So that means, if there is evidence of microevolution in humans, then humans too have the capacity to evolve into other species. And if that is true, the claim that God, upon the creation of man, perfected his creation takes a huge hit. Well, there is evidence of microevolution in humans, so let's start with race. There are clear differences between the different races of humans, like skin tone, average height, disease susceptibility, and even IQ averages. These differences are clearly a result of gene pools of geographically isolated populations of Homo sapiens being unable to trade genetic information with each other for long periods of time, and eventually this created legitimate genetic differences among the populations. If these populations had been isolated for a lot longer, say a few million years as opposed to a few 100,000 at best, it would be reasonable to assume, given adequate evolutionary selection pressures, that these populations would be unable to reproduce and create fertile offspring, and thus, by the biological definition, they would have become different species. Let's take the obvious difference in skin color among the human races. Melanin is a pigment responsible for the color of our skin, and higher concentrations of it yield darker skin, while lower concentrations yield lighter skin. Dark skin is very beneficial in hot areas with high concentrations of sunlight because of its ability to protect against harmful UV radiation. Consequently, humans in continents like Africa, as well as other nations near the equator, have high concentrations of melanin and therefore dark skin. However, the sun is also a great source of vitamin D, and in areas with low sunlight concentrations, light skin is very beneficial because of its ability to better absorb that vitamin D. Consequently, humans in places like Northern Europe have low concentrations of melanin and therefore light skin. Now let's look at a more nuanced difference. Human infants have the ability to digest milk because of the enzyme lactase, which enables their bodies to break down and digest lactose. However, this enzyme turns off for most individuals shortly after childhood, that is unless if you are of European descent. Since the dawn of the agricultural revolution, which was again about 12,000 years ago, humans began domesticating animals. Now somewhere along the line, probably in Turkey, humans began domesticating cows and goats. Now milk is extremely nutrient dense, and due to selection pressures, such as times of famine, natural selection favored individuals whose lactase enzyme turned off later or just did not turn off at all. The individuals with lactose tolerance had better reproductive success, and over hundreds and hundreds of generations, we now see lactose tolerance is predominant among individuals of European descent, but in East Asia, where historically milk was not heavily consumed, lactose intolerance is predominant. So now I've presented you with quite a bit of evidence of microevolution in humans, so I don't think I really need to go any further at all, because evolution is just the non-random selection of random variances, and there are random variances in humans, and so therefore microevolution and therefore macroevolution, because again, they are fundamentally the same, as Dr. Qadhi put it.
The only thing that we have to draw the line, that Adam and the children of Adam are a unique creation. And frankly, many things in science prove this point.
There is literally nothing in science that proves that humans were divinely created. This really can't even be asserted as a scientific hypothesis. 20th century philosopher of science Karl Popper put it best with his principle of falsification. If something is not falsifiable, then it is not scientific, and Dr. Qadhi's supernatural claim here is almost definitionally untestable, and therefore unfalsifiable, and therefore unscientific.
Right? Many things in science prove this point. Of them is language. We are the only creation that has language. And this fits in perfectly. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها. This fits in perfectly. That, Noam Chomsky, of course, he's known for his political views, but he's a linguist by profession, as you know. Noam Chomsky and others, they all believe that languages, as we know them, they all come from one language. All languages go back to one language. Well, this fits in perfectly with our own understanding. All languages go back to the language of Adam, the Adamic language.
Because of there not being a universal definition of language that is currently accepted in linguistics, I'm not going to contest Dr. Qadhi's claim that humans are the only animals with language. I will give that to him. However, monogenesis, or the claim that all languages stem back from a single first language, is not universally accepted in linguistics. Here is renowned psychologist and linguist Steven Pinker.
So do you think, just as we were talking about there being a particular tribe that spoke a particular language, that the proto-language of all modern languages was just one tribal language among many? I mean, were there lots of other languages that have left no descendants contemporary with the language of all?
That's quite possible. So it's possible that there was, as linguists call it, monogenesis. That is, if there was a single group of the first modern Homo sapiens who were passed through some bottleneck and hence were within shouting distance of one another and spoke one language. It may be that all our languages are descended from theirs. On the other hand, if Homo sapiens evolved with gene flow in a number of regions, there could have been a bunch of languages, and there's just no trace left of all but the one that happened to trace its lineage down to us.
And even if monogenesis was universally accepted, this first language being the language of Adam would not be. As to our knowledge of biological evolution, which plays a huge role in linguistics by the way, there was never a first human, like there never was a first tree kangaroo or a first quokka.
Also the concept of aql and knowledge. No other creature has aql the way we have aql. No other creature. Our aql is so powerful, we understand our aql and limitations of our aql. In other words, we have something, the fancy term for it is metacognition, which means we know what we know and why we know it and how we know it. Animals know. Animals know there's an impending danger. Animals know a flood is coming. Animals know the tiger's attacking, they're going to run away. This is knowledge. But they cannot know why they know and how they know. They cannot study their knowledge. This is metacognition. We can study our knowledge. We have history, we have arts, we have civilization, we have poetry. The animals don't have this. And there is no biological reason for us to have these special characteristics that no other species has.
Well, this is just a massive argument from ignorance. Yes, it is true that we don't know all the intricacies of human evolution and the explanation for the rapid increase in our brain size, but you can't just make a baseless supernatural claim in order to fill that gap in scientific knowledge, and then on top of that claim that there is no biological reason for our cognitive faculties. There are several theories that make an attempt to provide natural evolutionary-based explanations for the rapid increase in our brain size, and these theories are necessarily more probable than a divine creation, solely because they are natural explanations and not supernatural ones. Until it is demonstrated that the supernatural is even possible, a natural explanation will always be more probable. Also, I can just use this gap in our knowledge to posit pretty much anything I want to. It could be that magical fairies gifted us our intelligence, or perhaps a population of humans found an elf that gave them a magical brain-boosting elixir, or perhaps aliens from the Andromeda galaxy selectively bred us for intelligence. These propositions have equally the same amount of evidence for them as your supernatural human creation proposition does, which is literally none. Actually, the alien one is probably the most likely of them, because at least we know that life is possible. Dr. Qadhi has also claimed that humans are the only species to have metacognition, but this is not the case either, for there is ample evidence to suggest dolphins have metacognition and the ability to understand language syntax. If you analyze the encephalization quotients between dolphins and humans, or an average brain size to body size comparison, dolphins are not very far behind that of humans. We have such advanced technology and civilizations because our intelligence is paired with us living on land and us having our dexterous digits and opposable thumbs. But dolphins, despite their intelligence, live underwater, with fins that prevent them from making any real technological progress. One more thing, isn't our advanced intelligence just an arbitrary characteristic that you're pointing out to show how distinct we are from the rest of the animal kingdom? Consider this. The Greenland shark has an average lifespan of 400 years, which far exceeds the lifespan of any other vertebrate species. Therefore, the Greenland shark must have been divinely created. You see what I'm getting at?
So the bottom line, we as Muslims cannot accept the theory of evolution's premise that man himself is a part of this chain.
Alright, so from here, Dr. Qadhi goes on to talk about other stuff which isn't quite relevant to the video, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out. Again, if you want to watch that part, the link to the full video is in the description below.
Some of you in the audience came to me and said there's another theory, that is that these Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons could have been descendants of Adam but not human. Yeah, okay, but the problem comes. I said we don't have a timeline for Adam, and Adam could have been 50,000 years ago, but no matter whatever we do, to extend Adam to 3 million years is really a stretch. Because human history from the Quranic paradigm, Nuh and Ibrahim and whatnot, clearly were not millions of years ago. Ibrahim, by and large, we can say a few thousand years, 5,000 years ago, right? Nuh alayhi salam, a little bit, before then. So how far, and we know for a fact that between Nuh and Adam were 10 generations, right? Our Prophet said hadith, between Nuh and Adam were 10 generations. Now, those generations were longer, maybe even 1,000 years, so that's 10,000 years right there. Between Adam and Nuh could have been 10,000 years. Because remember, those generations were longer. Each generation is 1,000 years, right? So that's 10,000 years before Nuh. Nuh and Ibrahim, another 10 generations, another 10,000 years, right? So here we're kind of sort of saying 30, 40,000 years, which is basically what modern science itself is telling us.
The Quran claims that human beings used to live to be 1,000 years old. However, it doesn't say that each generation was 1,000 years long. Today, Americans live an average lifespan of almost 80 years, and yet each generation is about 25 years long. Going by the math here, if each human lived to be about 1,000 years old, then each generation would be about 313 years. So if Adam to Noah and Noah to Abraham were 20 generations, that would total just 6,260 years, which is substantially less than 20,000 years. Keep in mind that this is not taking into account the Quranic fact that each lifespan of humans got shorter and shorter after each passing generation. In fact, Abraham only lived to be 175 years old. And we know that it's been only 3,900 years since Abraham to now. This means that, well, Dr. Qadhi is demonstrably wrong. It seems to me that the Earth being 6 to 10,000 years old works pretty well with the Islamic paradigm as well.
Which is basically what modern science itself is telling us. Homo sapiens, as we exist, we did not exist 1,000,000 years ago. You have Lucy, and you have hominids, and you have Homo erectus, and Homo this, and Homo that. You don't have Homo sapien. Homo sapien is 30, 40, 50. That's the mark that is given. And frankly, Islamically, we have no problems extrapolating that much. But you want to go beyond this, and you want to say 3 million, which is what Lucy is. Lucy is one of the oldest hominids discovered. She's around 2.5 million years old. Now, you're talking very problematically from an Islamic standpoint. But, hey, if somebody says Lucy was a descendant of Adam, and Adam was 5 million years ago, well, Islamically, the Sharia did not reveal a calendar. The Quran did not reveal a historical timeline, so I'm not saying that's wrong.
So you're right, Homo sapiens did not exist millions of years ago, but they did exist far before 30 or 40 or 50,000 years ago, despite your assertion. Homo sapiens have at least existed for about 200,000 years, again, originating from Africa. Humans were already in Australia as early as 60,000 years ago. Of course, to measure how old human fossils are, we have to use this shoddy form of dating called carbon dating, which I hear is really unreliable.
I know carbon-14 dating, and this is as solid as any science you can have.
Oh wait, never mind. It really is solid science. Also, from what I've read, there is a debate on where Adam lived when he was on Earth, but no source that I've come across said anything about him living in Africa, which is, again, of course, the place where the first anatomically modern humans appeared. Also, Adam was like 90 feet tall. And it wasn't just Adam who was a giant, as each generation from Adam to Muhammad just grew gradually shorter and shorter as each generation passed. And there is just no evidence to suggest that human beings were ever this tall, especially not 50,000 years ago. I mean, how can you even reconcile this?
The theory of evolution is not problematic at all, except for human evolution. And when it comes to us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did a miracle, and that's exactly what we would expect, that we are special, we are different. That's what Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That's what Allah says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. That's what Allah says, أَوَلَمْ يَنظُرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Don't look at yourselves, look at how you were created. We are a different creation, a special creation. We have honored the children of Adam. We have made them better than the other species, other creation. This is in the Quran. فَضَّلْنَاهُ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. And the point of Allah fashioning us with His own hands, بِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيْهِ, and Allah breathing His ruh into us. We are special. That's exactly what the Quranic message is. And frankly, there are elements of science that indicate our special nature. I mentioned some of them. So, putting all of this into account, the max that anyone could say, beyond which I would believe as a scholar of Islam, as a theologian, that you're going beyond believing in the Quran. We don't believe the Quran is a book of fairy tales. We don't believe that Allah wanted to give a fairy tale of Adam. That's not the way of the Quran. And we have been there and done that historically. We've had groups that done that, and they have abandoned the salah, abandoned the zakah. They didn't believe in heaven and hell. They didn't believe in resurrection because they said, "In hiya illa asatirul awwalin." These are fairy tales. The Quran did not come to be a Da Vinci Code, a book of symbols. No, the Quran is in simple, plain Arabic language, and up until our history, everything that we've read in history and science and the Quran supports one another. And we've been riding the wave very happily. This is our first bump, and it is a test from Allah. And I hope that Allah subhanahu wa taala allows us to pass that test. If I've said anything that is incorrect, it's from my own waswas and shaitan's whisperings to me. And if I've said anything that is correct, it is from Allah subhanahu wa taala. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alright, so I figured I'd just let the video play out to the end. So from the points I've raised, I hope to have demonstrated to you just how incompatible Islam and evolution are. I do respect Dr. Yasir Qadhi, and I do think he was a very smart man, but not even he was actually able to reconcile Islam and evolution, because again, they are just fundamentally not compatible, as I hope to have demonstrated to you again. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you did, and subscribe for more content. Thanks.